4:30. The ritual never wavered. Caleb Sterling's small palm pressed against cool glass, his finger tracing the same invisible line toward the endless Texas horizon. Behind him, his mother Olivia held her breath, clutching another worthless specialist report. The Sterling energy heiress had spent fortunes on answers, neurologists with pristine diplomas, behavioral experts speaking in clinical whispers, autism specialists promising breakthroughs that never came. Then came the knock. Mark Sullivan stood at her gilded doorstep, dust settling from his weathered boots onto marble worth more than his yearly income. His daughter Ruby peered around his legs, sunlight catching her curious eyes. "Mom," Mark said with the quiet certainty of a father who'd learned to listen. "Your son isn't confused. He's remembering." His calloused finger followed Caleb's gaze across golden wheat, pointing toward something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Olivia's manicured fingers tightened around the doorframe. The stranger's words hit like ice water against her carefully constructed world of treatments and therapies. She studied Mark's sun-weathered face, searching for the telltale signs of another charlatan promising miracles for money. But his eyes held something different, something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you?" Her voice carried the practiced authority of boardroom negotiations, yet it trembled at the edges. Mark's weathered hands remained steady at his sides. "Name's Mark Sullivan, Mom. Ruby and I work the farm next door." He nodded toward the rolling fields that stretched beyond her pristine gardens. "Been watching your boy for a few weeks now." The word watching sent alarm bells clanging through Olivia's mind. Her grip on the door tightened until her knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed danger, yet something about this man's presence felt different from the parade of fortune-seekers who usually appeared at her door. Ruby stepped forward, her small hand finding her father's calloused palm. "Mama, can I tell her about the sad boy?" she whispered, her voice carrying the innocent clarity that only children possess. Mark's eyes never left Olivia's face. Ruby noticed him first. Kids see things we miss sometimes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble entryway, and somewhere behind Olivia, Caleb continued his daily ritual, finger pressed against glass like a prayer made visible. The sound of his small hand tapping against the window seemed suddenly louder in the tense silence. I don't understand." Olivia's words came out sharper than intended, defensive walls rising like steel barriers. "Caleb has been evaluated by the finest specialists in the country. If there was something to see, they would have found it." Mark's expression remained gentle, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of recognition that made Olivia's breath catch. "With respect, Mom, sometimes the finest degrees can't replace a father's heart." Ruby tugged at her father's shirt, pointing toward the window where Caleb stood. "Daddy, he's doing it again, just like you said he would." Mark followed his daughter's gaze, his face softening with an understanding that Olivia had spent 2 years and countless dollars trying to find. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. Olivia found herself studying Mark's face, searching for signs of deception or hidden agendas. Instead, she saw something that made her chest ache with longing, the quiet confidence of someone who understood her son in ways she'd begun to fear she never would. "What exactly do you think you see?" Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile hope was building in the space between them. Mark's gaze moved from Caleb to the vast field beyond, his eyes tracking the same invisible line that her son traced daily. "Permission to show you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice carrying the careful respect of someone who knew he was walking on sacred ground. Olivia's rational mind catalogued every reason to slam the door. Stranger danger, security protocols, the carefully managed boundaries that protected her family from a world full of people who saw only dollar signs when they looked at the Sterling name. But Caleb chose that moment to turn from the window, his luminous eyes finding Mark's face through the glass. For the first time in months, her son's expression shifted from distant longing to something that looked almost like recognition. The change was subtle, a slight softening around his eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders. But to a mother who had memorized every nuance of her child's limited expressions, it was as dramatic as sunrise. 5 minutes, she heard herself saying, stepping back from the door. You have 5 minutes. Mark nodded with the gravity of someone who understood the magnitude of trust being placed in his hands. Ruby bounced on her toes, her excitement barely contained as they crossed the threshold into a world of marble and crystal that glittered like a museum. The contrast was stark. Mark's work-worn denim against imported Italian stone, Ruby's scuffed sneakers on Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars. Yet neither father nor daughter seemed intimidated by the opulence surrounding them. Mark's attention remained focused on Caleb, who had returned to his post at the window, small finger resuming its faithful point toward the horizon. See how he holds his hand? Mark's voice was soft, respectful. That's not random. That's purpose. The doctors said it's stimming behavior. Olivia's words carried the weight of countless consultations, medical opinions that had become gospel in her desperate search for answers. Self-soothing repetitive motion. They recommended we redirect him to more appropriate activities. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained gentle. What if it's not self-soothing, Mom? What if he's trying to tell you something? Ruby had wandered closer to Caleb, her natural curiosity overcoming any shyness. She positioned herself near the window, mimicking Caleb's stance, her own small finger pointing in the same direction. Daddy, I can see it from here too. The big tree with the broken branch. Mark's eyes sharpened with interest. Show me exactly where you're looking, Ruby. The moment Ruby's finger aligned with Caleb's, something extraordinary happened. Caleb's rigid posture softened, and he turned to look at the girl beside him with an expression of wonder that took Olivia's breath away. It was the first time in months that her son had acknowledged another person's presence with such clarity. Ruby smiled at Caleb, her gap-toothed grin warm and genuine. Hi, she said simply. I see it too. Caleb didn't respond with words, but his free hand slowly rose to mirror Ruby's position, and for a moment both children stood pointing toward the same distant spot, like tiny sentinels guarding a secret. Mark's voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke. Mrs. Sterling, when's the last time you really looked at that old oak tree? Olivia followed the children's joined gaze across the expanse of her perfectly manicured grounds, past the infinity pool and designer landscaping, to where her property met Mark's humble farm. There, standing alone in the middle of what appeared to be an empty field, was a massive oak tree. She'd seen it thousands of times, of course. It was visible from every window on the east side of the house. But she'd never really looked at it, never considered it anything more than a landmark. Now, studying it through her son's eyes, she noticed details that had somehow escaped her attention. The way its enormous branches spread like protective arms, the unusual split in its trunk about halfway up, and yes, the broken branch that Ruby had mentioned, hanging at an odd angle like a marker pointing skyward. It's just a tree, she said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Look closer, Mark said, his weathered finger joining the children's as all three pointed toward the oak. See that heavy branch about 15 feet up? The one that looks different from the others? Olivia squinted, trying to follow their direction. Slowly, her eyes began to pick out what they were seeing. There, nestled in the crook where the broken branch met the trunk, were the weathered remains of what looked like wooden boards. Old, weathered, deliberately placed. Her breath caught in her throat as recognition dawned. Is that a treehouse?" Mark finished quietly. "Or what's left of one?" Ruby bounced excitedly beside Caleb, who remained perfectly still, his finger unwavering in its direction. "Someone built it a long time ago. Daddy says it's been there for years and years." The treehouse. The words echoed in Olivia's mind like a bell being struck. Suddenly she was 19 again, standing in her childhood bedroom, listening to Robert Sterling describe his plans for their future family. "We'll build our kids the most amazing treehouse," he'd said, his eyes bright with dreams. "Right in the middle of our property where they can see everything. It'll be their secret kingdom." She'd laughed and kissed him, swept up in his vision of picket fences and childhood adventures. But then life had intervened. Business school, the company expansion, her father's unexpected death, and the subsequent chaos of inheriting sterling energy at 25. The treehouse had become another casualty of their increasingly complicated lives, filed away with other abandoned dreams. "Your husband built that?" Mark's words weren't a question. They carried the certainty of someone who had observed and understood what others had missed. Olivia's legs felt suddenly unsteady. She gripped the window frame for support, her perfectly composed facade cracking like ice under pressure. "How could you possibly know that?" Her voice came out raw, vulnerable. Mark's expression remained gentle, but there was steel beneath the kindness. "Ruby and I were clearing fence line about 3 weeks ago when we found some old lumber scattered around the base of that tree. Good wood, expensive. The kind a man would use if he was building something special for someone he loved." He paused, letting the words sink in. "There was a child's drawing stuck between 2 boards, crayon on paper, protected by a piece of plastic, a picture of a little boy flying a kite. The world seemed to tilt on its axis." Olivia's breath came in short, sharp gasps as the implications hit her like physical blows. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she spoke, memories flooded back. Robert's secretive weekend trips in the months before his death, his excitement about a surprise for Caleb, the way he'd smile mysteriously whenever she asked what he was working on in the garage. She'd assumed it was another of his expensive gadgets, or perhaps a business venture he wasn't ready to discuss. Never this, never something so simple and pure and heartbreaking. Mark watched her process the revelation with the patience of someone who understood that some truths needed time to take root. "The kite in the drawing had Daddy and Caleb written across it in crayon," he added softly. "Your husband was building more than a treehouse, Mom. He was building memories." Ruby's young voice cut through the heavy silence like sunlight through storm clouds. "That's why the boy is so sad," she announced with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children possess. "He's waiting for his daddy to come back and finish their special place." Caleb's finger remained pressed against the glass, but his other hand had moved to rest on Ruby's shoulder. The first spontaneous physical contact Olivia had witnessed from her son in over a year. The sight of it broke something loose in her chest, a sob that she'd been holding back for months. Mark stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring without being intrusive. "Mrs. Sterling, grief looks different in every person, but sometimes when we're hurting, we hold on to the last place where love felt safe." His eyes met hers with an understanding that went deeper than words. "Your boy isn't confused. He's keeping faith." The weight of understanding crashed over Olivia like a tsunami, bringing with it 2 years of accumulated guilt and self-recrimination. How many specialists had she paraded through their home, each one treating Caleb's behavior like a problem to be solved rather than a message to be understood? How many times had she redirected his pointing, viewing it as an obstacle to his development rather than a bridge to his heart? The irony was devastating. In her desperate attempt to help her son move forward, she'd been trying to pull him away from the one thing that connected him to his father. Her legs finally gave way, and she sank into the window seat beside her son, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, but the words felt pathetically inadequate. Mark's voice remained steady, a lighthouse in the storm of her emotions. "There's nothing to apologize for, ma'am. You were protecting him the only way you knew how." He moved to stand beside the window, his own gaze following the invisible line that connected Caleb to his father's unfinished dream. "But maybe it's time to stop protecting him from his memories and start helping him honor them." Ruby had somehow positioned herself between Olivia and Caleb, her small hands reaching out to both of them with the fearless compassion that only children possess. "My mama went to heaven too," she said simply. "Daddy says she lives in all the places where she loved us most." "Maybe your daddy lives in the treehouse place." Caleb's eyes, usually so distant and unfocused, turned to Ruby with an intensity that took Olivia's breath away. For the first time since his father's death, Caleb's lips parted, and a single word escaped like a prayer being answered. "Daddy." The word was soft, uncertain, but unmistakably clear. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, fresh tears spilling over her fingers. It was the first time he'd spoken his father's name since the funeral, the first real word he'd uttered in months. Mark's expression softened with the recognition of a sacred moment. "That's right, son," he said gently, as if he'd been part of Caleb's life forever. "Your daddy's waiting for you in that tree." Ruby clapped her hands together, her delight infectious. "Can we go see it? Please? I bet it's the most beautiful treehouse in the whole world." Her enthusiasm seemed to spark something in Caleb, who turned to his mother with an expression of hopeful longing that shattered and rebuilt her heart simultaneously. The walk across the perfectly manicured grounds felt like a pilgrimage. Olivia had traversed this same path thousands of times during her morning runs and evening walks, but she'd never really seen it through her son's eyes. Now, with Caleb's small hand in hers and Mark's steady presence beside them, every step carried the weight of revelation. Ruby ran ahead, her natural exuberance undaunted by the solemnity of the moment. "It's even bigger up close," she called back to them, her voice filled with wonder. "And look, there are steps carved right into the trunk." Indeed, as they drew closer, the evidence of Robert's careful craftsmanship became unmistakable. Carved footholds spiraled up the massive trunk, each one worn smooth by weather but still solid and purposeful. The treehouse itself was both more and less than Olivia had imagined. Weather had not been kind to the wooden platform nestled in the oak's embrace, but the structure's bones were sound, built with the careful attention to detail that Robert brought to everything he loved. Pieces of the original walls remained, and she could see where he'd planned to expand, where windows would have offered views across the entire property. Most heartbreaking of all, a small wooden sign hung from one of the remaining support beams, its carefully painted letters faded but still legible. "Caleb's Castle. No grown-ups allowed. Except Daddy." Mark studied the construction with the practiced eye of someone who understood both wood and the hearts of men. "He did good work," he said simply. "This would have been something special." His words carried no judgment for the project's incomplete state, only respect for a father's love made manifest in hammer and nail. Caleb had grown very still at the base of the tree, his small face tilted upward as he took in every detail of his father's creation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a clarity that hadn't been there before. "Daddy said we would fly kites from up there. He said I could see the whole world." The words came out in a rush, as if a dam had burst inside him, releasing months of stored memories and longing. Olivia knelt beside her son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since Robert's death. "Tell me about the kites, baby. Tell me what Daddy promised you." And slowly, haltingly, Caleb began to share the secret conversations he'd had with his father, the plans they'd made together during those mysterious weekend trips. The picture that emerged was of a man who had understood his son's need for high places and wide views, who had recognized that some children needed to soar in order to feel truly alive. Ruby had been exploring the base of the tree with the thorough curiosity of childhood, and her excited shout brought them all running. "Look what I found! Look!" She held up a small wooden box, its surface weathered but intact. The box bore Caleb's name in Robert's careful handwriting, along with a date from just 2 weeks before his death. Inside, wrapped in careful layers of plastic, were the tools of a father's love: a hand-carved wooden kite frame, silk fabric in Caleb's favorite shade of blue, strong cord wound carefully on a handmade spool, and a letter addressed to his son in Robert's familiar script. Mark stepped back, recognizing the sacred nature of the moment, but Ruby remained close to Caleb, her presence a source of strength and companionship that seemed to anchor him to the present while honoring his past. With trembling fingers, Olivia opened the letter that her husband had written to their son from beyond the grave. Robert's words reached across the chasm of death with such clarity and love that she could almost hear his voice reading them aloud. "My dearest Caleb," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to help you fly your first kite from our treehouse. But I want you to know that every time you look up at this tree, I'll be here with you. This kite was made especially for you, with silk the color of the Texas sky and a frame strong enough to dance with the wind for hours. When you fly it from our castle, you'll be able to see all the way to the horizon and maybe even catch a glimpse of heaven, where I'll be cheering you on." The letter continued with detailed instructions for assembling and flying the kite, written in the patient tone of a father who had planned to teach these lessons in person. "There's more," Olivia whispered, her voice thick with tears as she continued reading. "The most important thing about flying a kite, son, is that it's all about connection. The kite dances in the sky, but it stays connected to your hands by the strongest thread. That's what love is like. Even when someone goes to heaven, the connection stays strong. Every time you fly this kite, you'll feel me holding the other end of the string. And someday, when you have children of your own, you'll teach them to fly kites from this same tree, and our love will keep growing bigger and bigger, passed down from father to child like the most precious gift in the world." Mark had moved closer during the reading, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Without words, he began examining the kite components, with the careful attention of someone who understood both the mechanics of flight and the weight of promises made by fathers to their sons. The afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the field as Mark and Caleb worked together to assemble the kite that Robert had crafted with such love. Ruby appointed herself as assistant and cheerleader, her enthusiasm infectious as she helped untangle cord and hold pieces steady. Olivia watched from the base of the tree, her heart alternately soaring and breaking as she witnessed her son emerge from the shell of grief that had encased him for so many months. Every movement, every word, every shared glance between Caleb and Mark spoke of healing beginning to take root. "Your daddy knew exactly what he was doing," Mark murmured to Caleb as they worked. "This frame is perfectly balanced. The silk will catch the wind just right, and see this long tail? That'll keep her steady when the breeze gets strong." His words carried the reverence of one craftsman appreciating another's work, and Caleb absorbed every detail with the intensity of a student finally finding his teacher. When the kite was finally complete, it was a thing of beauty that took Olivia's breath away. The blue silk seemed to glow in the golden light, and Robert's careful construction was evident in every joint and connection. Mark tested the balance with the practiced movements of someone who had clearly flown many kites in his lifetime. "She's perfect," he announced, and the pride in his voice seemed to encompass both Robert's craftsmanship and Caleb's patient assistance. "Now comes the best part." Ruby clapped her hands together, her excitement barely containable. "Can we climb up to the castle? Please? Daddy says the higher you are, the better the kite flies." Mark studied the carved footholds with a careful eye, testing their stability before nodding. I think we can manage that, but we'll go slow and careful. Your daddy built this treehouse to last, but we need to respect it. The climb up to the platform was a journey of discovery for all of them. Each carved foothold told a story of Robert's dedication. Each remaining piece of construction spoke of dreams carefully planned and lovingly executed. When they finally reached the platform, the view was breathtaking. From this height, the Sterling property spread out like a living map, with the house looking almost toy-like in the distance. But more than the physical view, there was something else up here, a sense of peace and connection that seemed to emanate from the very wood beneath their feet. Your daddy picked the perfect spot, Mark told Caleb as they prepared to launch the kite. Good height, open sky, steady breeze, a kite flyer's dream. Ruby had positioned herself as the official kite holder, her small hands gripping the frame with careful determination. On 3, Mark announced. 1, 2, 3. The kite caught the wind on its first try, lifting into the Texas sky with a grace that seemed almost magical. The blue silk danced against the golden sunset, climbing higher and higher until it became a small speck of color against the vast canvas of sky. Caleb's face was transformed with wonder and joy, his hands steady on the string as he felt the pull of wind and silk. I can feel it, Mama, he called down to Olivia, his voice carrying a happiness she hadn't heard in so long. I can feel Daddy holding the other end. Olivia climbed carefully up to join them on the platform, and when she looked up at the dancing kite, she could almost see Robert's hands guiding its flight. Mark stepped back, allowing the family this moment of reunion and healing, but his presence remained a steady anchor in the swirling emotions of the afternoon. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to celebrate the kite's joyous flight, a profound sense of peace settled over the small group gathered in the oak tree. Caleb's transformation was remarkable, from the distant, unreachable child of that morning to this bright-eyed boy who chattered excitedly about wind patterns and kite construction. Can we come back tomorrow? He asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. I want to finish the treehouse just like Daddy planned. Mark exchanged a glance with Olivia, and she saw in his eyes an offer of partnership that went far beyond this single afternoon. If your mama agrees, he said carefully, Ruby and I would be honored to help you complete your daddy's work. The word honored carried weight that made Olivia's chest tight with gratitude, and something that felt dangerously like hope. The weeks that followed were filled with the sounds of construction and laughter as the unlikely foursome worked together to complete Robert's vision. Mark provided the expertise and oversight, but he consulted with everyone before making decisions. Caleb's attention to detail and organizational skills made him the natural quartermaster, ensuring that tools and materials were always exactly where they needed to be. Ruby's enthusiasm and energy kept spirits high during the inevitable frustrations that come with any building project. And Olivia discovered that her years of managing complex business projects had given her skills that translated surprisingly well to construction management, the revelation that she could contribute meaningfully to something built with hands rather than money felt profoundly liberating. By the end of the second week, the treehouse had walls on 3 sides and the framing for a peaked roof that would shed rain while providing the maximum interior space. The structure was beginning to feel like a real place rather than just a platform in a tree, and Caleb's excitement was infectious. Can we sleep up there tonight? He asked hopefully, his eyes bright with adventure. Mark studied the partial construction with a careful eye before shaking his head gently. Not quite yet, son. We need to get the roof finished and add some safety railings before it's ready for overnight guests. But soon. His promise carried the weight of someone who understood that anticipation could be as delicious as fulfillment when the waiting was filled with purposeful work. The treehouse grew from a simple platform into a magical retreat that exceeded even Caleb's ambitious dreams. The walls were solid and true, fitted with windows that framed perfect views of the surrounding countryside. The roof was weatherproof, but designed with a skylight that would allow stargazing on clear nights. A rope ladder provided the adventurous entrance that Ruby had requested, while conventional stairs, carved into the trunk, offered safer access for less nimble visitors. Every detail reflected the collaborative nature of its construction: Mark's craftsmanship, Caleb's precision, Ruby's creativity, and Olivia's organizational skills woven together into something greater than the sum of its parts. When Mark finally pronounced the treehouse complete and ready for its first official occupants, the moment called for ceremony. Ruby had taken charge of planning a celebration that would honor both the finished structure and the memory of the man who had started it all. She had prepared a feast of sandwiches and homemade cookies, while Caleb had carefully crafted a dedication plaque that read, "Robert Sterling Memorial Tree House, built with love by his family and friends." The simple words captured the essence of what they had created together. Not just a building, but a memorial to love that would live and grow rather than simply commemorate what was lost. The climb to the completed treehouse felt different from all the previous ascents during construction. This time, they were entering a finished space that belonged fully to them, a creation born of shared labor and mutual affection. The interior was everything they had dreamed it would be: spacious enough for comfortable gathering, intimate enough to feel cozy, and perfectly positioned to offer breathtaking views in every direction. Caleb immediately claimed the spot beneath the skylight, lying flat on his back to gaze up through the specially positioned opening. "I can see everything from here," he announced with satisfaction. "The clouds, the birds, and all the way to where Daddy is waiting." His words carried no sadness, only a deep contentment that spoke to healing completed rather than grief endured. As they shared their first meal in the completed treehouse, with sandwiches that tasted better than any five-star cuisine and conversation that flowed as naturally as breathing, Olivia realized that something profound had been built here, beyond wood and nails. They had created a family, not bound by blood or law, but by choice and affection and shared purpose. Mark and Ruby had become as essential to Caleb's happiness as air and sunshine, while Caleb had brought a purpose and joy to their lives that filled spaces they hadn't even realized were empty. The treehouse would always be Robert's gift to his son, but it had become something more, a foundation for relationships that would last far beyond childhood and into whatever future awaited them all. As the celebration wound down and the sun began its familiar descent toward the horizon, Caleb made one final request. "Can we fly Daddy's kite from here? I want to show him the treehouse is finally finished." And so they did, launching the blue silk creation into the golden evening sky from the highest point of the completed structure. The kite danced against the sunset with the same grace it had shown weeks ago. But this time there was no sadness in its flight, only joy and accomplishment, and the deep satisfaction that comes from promises kept. As Caleb held the string and felt the pull of wind against silk, his face was radiant with a happiness that seemed to illuminate everyone around him. "He can see it, Mama," he said with absolute certainty. "Daddy can see everything we built for him." Standing in the treehouse that had become a symbol of healing and connection, surrounded by the people who had become her chosen family, Olivia felt a peace descend that she hadn't experienced since before Robert's death. The ritual that had begun with a small finger pressed against glass had led them all to this moment. Not an ending, but a beginning. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new opportunities to support and care for each other. But tonight, under a canopy of stars visible through their carefully crafted skylight, they were complete. The treehouse stood as testament to the power of understanding over judgment, of love over fear, and of the unexpected gifts that come when we allow ourselves to be helped by those we might otherwise overlook. Sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the most unexpected places, not from boardrooms or therapy sessions or expert consultations, but from the generous heart of a neighbor who takes the time to really see what a child is trying to say.